Hey everybody, Steve Atkinson here in my studio. The lights are on, the coffee's hot, and I hope you're doing great. Today I'm going to talk you through the process and my thoughts while working on a painting called One More for the Road. It's a nocturne that I recently did for an upcoming show in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This is a 40 by 30 inch painting that I did using a smaller painting that I'd done earlier in the year as my guide. Unfortunately, I didn't set up the camera and make a video of that painting, and now it's gone. So I'm not able to hold it up for you, but here's a capture of it. At least I got that before it went to its forever home. Now, I asked the new owners when they bought it if they would be all right with me painting a larger version of it, and they kindly agreed. Now, technically, no, you don't have to ask permission. It is your painting and your image, but it's the right thing to do, I think. The last thing that I want is to lose collectors because of a misunderstanding. But be prepared, they may say no, and you need to honor their wishes. I wouldn't have painted this if they'd said no. I do the same thing if I know who the collectors are of one of my paintings that I want to put on a greeting card. Transparency is always appreciated, believe me, and only once did I have them say no. Obviously, this larger painting took longer than the original, which was 20 by 16 inches, half the size of the 40 by 30 inch painting that I'm going to do for you today. So this one had to be painted with more detail than the first version. I think this one took me about 40 hours to complete. So I can't show you all of it, but I show you the most important parts and I talk you through my process. I've kept the painting speed close to actual speed so you can watch how I apply the paint and how I handle the brush. For me, the purpose of painting a night painting is for that delicious mood that you can get. And you get that by keeping your edges soft and the shadows dark and your highlights nice and cool. As a side note, nocturnes are painted exactly the opposite of daytime paintings. In a nocturne, the moonlight's cool and the shadows are warmer. And in a daylight painting, the daylight is warm and the shadows are cool. So, what do you say? Let's get started. This is the drawing on the canvas. I know it's kind of hard to see, and if you don't know what my process for that is, here's a link to it up above. This is the house brush that I start out with. It's a 1.5 inch Purdy, just any hardware store. And these are a couple of the large brushes that I use in order to put in the sky and the start of the trees. You may have noticed that when I start my paintings or landscapes, daytime paintings, I use a yellow ochre for my underpainting. But when I work nocturnes, I'll use burnt sienna because it's closer to that kind of deep color that I want. And so I'm starting to put in the sky here very thin. You can still see the underpainting through it. It's so thin. And then once that's in, then I go down to a smaller brush and I start shaping those clouds. I'll start sculpting them out. And everything, and you'll probably hear me say this multiple times, but everything is kept really loose at this point. All I'm trying to do is get the value and get close to the right hue. It doesn't even matter if the actual hue or color, just another word for color, it doesn't even matter if that's right, because you can easily tweak that, but you need to get those value relationships. And starting with big shape and going to small is the way I do all my paintings. It's much easier to start with big shapes and then carve into them or carve them away with smaller shapes. That way you're going to have a more cohesive painting. So when I'm putting this tree in, I'm not putting in a lot of branches, no individual leaves, and I put it down relatively thinly, and then I'll use this larger brush that you just saw me using, and I will soften up a lot of the brushwork that's in there, because that's more of a background tree, and the last thing that I want to do is have it jump around a whole lot on you. And if you stare at your reference, that's what it's going to do. You're going to see all these hard edges. It's important not to stare at your reference. It just kind of, if you've probably heard other artists tell you to squint down at what you're seeing, and it's going to simplify the shapes for you, and that's really true. I do that all the time. And so I've gotten the basic clouds in, and I'm just trying to break up a little bit of this tree now. Now I'm going to go in and give it a little bit of structure. Punch some of those holes in there. And you do them more towards the edges. You can have some in the middle too, but you're going to be much happier if you keep your holes more towards the outside. And you'll see throughout this painting, I use the side of my brush and I use it kind of lightly, and that allows me to have the brush do the work for you. It's kind of like when you're working in watercolors and you use the side of your brush, or you use it so that it's a little bit drier. That's kind of what you do here. You're going to put it down, use the side of your brush, allow those bristles to give you that feeling like there's a lot of detail there when there really isn't.
Morning shows its dazzling blue. If you ain't coming, I hear the road alone. Spraying, making the show. The butterflies in my heart, it's time to let them go. They don't belong here anymore. After all this lonesome traveling, did we happen to be back home? But it just leaves me thinking all the places I'd like to roam. After all this lonesome traveling, let me happen to be back home. But it just leaves me thinking all the places I'd like to roam. If you ain't coming, I hit the road alone. I hit the road alone.
towards the end of the song there, and anytime you see me using my fingers like I do, it's just simply a way for me to manipulate the paint, soften the edges. Sometimes I'll do it with a paintbrush, sometimes I'll do it with a paper towel, but a lot of times it's just faster and I get a better feel when I go in with my pinky or one of my other fingers. It's a nice way of softening up edges. And I always figure that when I put down a brush stroke, I'm going to have to go in and soften up that edge. I'm going to have to manipulate it. That's just kind of the second part of laying in the brush stroke. So don't worry about when you put down your brush stroke if it's maybe a little harsh or a little bit dark. If it's generally right, you can go in and manipulate it with some either finger or a brush, something like that, and you can get that feeling that you're looking for. Now, as I'm working on the rear end of this horse, remember the light in this painting is cool, the light source. And so let's say the horse is yellow or reddish brown. You add some cool into that, and that yellow is going to turn green on you. And it may seem odd at the time when you're putting it down, and you're going to be painting a green horse, but with all of the other surrounding colors, it's going to work. The thing to remember is that no color is in a vacuum. Everything influences everything else. And so if you know that and you trust that the other colors that are around it are going to be influencing it and that eventually it's going to read right. Now, one of the ways that this horse is going to read right and you're going to know that it's a warmer horse is the fact that the water is going to be so cool. This water is really, and I've just kind of forced this, is going to be very blue-green, and I'm going to use a really intense chroma on that, or color. And since all the colors that are around this horse are going to be very cool, this greenish yellow or burnt sienna that's kind of a dull brown is going to read very warm in this light. And it all has to do with the colors that are surrounding it. So, don't question your paint too soon. Put it in the way you believe that it should be. Leave it alone until you get all the other colors down and around it. And then you can go in and you can manipulate if you want to. Does that make sense? This is a good spot to talk a little bit about where the color turns from the light into the shadow. There's always this saturation that happens, particularly when you have a nice strong light source. And this is a relatively strong light source. So, as that color turns away from the light, you're going to see more of what that real, original, local color would be on this horse. So there might be a little band of a green, and then as it turns, you're seeing more of that burnt sienna color. And that gives you that visual clue that this is the color of the horse. So that's something that's good to remember when you're trying to take a very bright light and turn it into the darkness. If you do that little band of color, you're going to find that it reads just like it should. Oh, I want to remind everybody, and if this is your first time watching one of my painting videos, I'd like to talk a little bit about the fact that into every mixture of paint that I do, I mix in a little bit of liquid. It's my painting medium. It doesn't matter if I'm painting wet into wet or wet into dry. I mix that liquid in there, and what that does is wet into wet, it allows me to work dark into light and light into dark. And if it's wet into dry, it allows me to put down brush strokes that look like they're being painted wet into wet. And so I don't put a lot in, just take a little dab on your brush and then put it in your paint, mix it around. And as long as you kind of remember to do that on everything, the other nice thing about working with the liquid is that the colors, as you're painting and you come back and everything is dry, it normally dries overnight. It's dries so quickly. But that painting, it doesn't have the tendency to have all the colors become chalky the way working sometimes with oil paints you can do that if you cut it with too much turpentine, for instance. You'll come back and part of your painting will look wonderful and part of it will look like there was a snowstorm. And until you put some kind of a varnish, Damar varnish or painting medium over the top of that, you're not going to get the real sense of what color or what value is actually there. And so that's one of the reasons why I use liquid. I've just found that it really helps me to not struggle so much with trying to control my paint. It makes it a lot more pleasant. So if you've never used liquid, give it a try. Don't try it on a big important painting. It's best to try it on a smaller one and just kind of see how you like it. Everybody's different. Some people hate liquid, and that's okay. It's just that I found that it works well for me and makes the paint behave. And doggone it, that's what it's all about, right? Is making this stupid paint behave. I just want to jump over and talk about what I'm working on right now. And that is that the horse face, the lit part. And, probably out of this whole painting, this gave me the most trouble, is getting the look of this drinking horse just the way I liked it. And I probably cut a bunch of this stuff out, going back and forth until I got the warmth that I wanted, that looked like it was the same color as the horse, but it was in that very cool light. So I'm just kind of in the early stages of getting those planes put in, and as things turn away, I get a little darker blue. But at the same time, I'm also working around the horse because I know that you've got to have that ripple effect that's going on around him drinking to get the sense that he's in water and that he's disturbing it. So just kind of starting in to get this ellipse where I want it. And with my first painting that I did of this, I worked a lot more on trying to get more ripples, and I found that it was just unnecessary. It just cluttered things up. So basically I went back to doing one complete ellipse circle, and then just a couple little ripples a little farther out that were not that perfect ellipse. But this is probably going to happen on just about every painting you do. I think it was Michelangelo who said something like, if people knew how much he struggled with every painting or with every sculpture that he did, they wouldn't think that he was so talented. It's a natural part of it. And the trick is not to accept something on your canvas that isn't the absolute best that you can do. So if you don't get it on the first try, that's okay. That's the great thing about oil paint. It's not done until you say it's done. And so don't worry about if it's not perfect. A lot of times I'll just get something close and know that I'll come back the next day once the liquid has dried it, and I can go back in and take that as my next jumping off point. So I'd really suggest you think about your paintings if you're doing larger, more complicated ones, and something like this with horses in moonlight and cowboys. if you're doing something that's a little more complicated, know that it's something that requires steps. You may get it on the first try, which is terrific, but then a lot of times what you'll find is that you're spending the rest of the painting working on everything else around it and trying not to screw up that one little part that you got right. Nothing on your painting, well, let me slow down and say this, nothing on your painting is precious. If you painted it once, you can paint it again. And I really recommend not worrying about painting over something that you got just right. Obviously avoid painting over it if you can, but don't worry about it. I mean, you know you can do it. You've done it before, and allow yourself the knowledge that painting it's not just building up. I think painting is building up and tearing down, and building it up better and tearing it down, and until you're tearing down smaller and smaller bits, and then you get to the little gingerbread that's on the outside of the house, because everything else works just fine. But that gingerbread is just as important as the structure of it when it comes to a painting. Just don't paint the gingerbread first and then worry about leaving that all alone because you got that curve just right, or you got the amount of detail in that just right. Heck, you'll repaint it. I mean, you shouldn't be painting the gingerbread first anyways, but that's another video for another day. Let's talk a little bit about the vegetation that I have going in. There was a time when I first started out doing this where I would try and paint literally every branch and every blade of grass that I saw exactly the way I saw it. And that way lies madness, truly. Just know what you want to do is get down to the general sense, the general color, and know that you can go in and you can add your individual little blades of grass or leaves as you go along. That once again, it's a process. And if you go in and you add all these little details at first, you're going to find that you're going to have to go in and paint over them anyways to make things look right. Either that or leave something on your canvas that's wrong, and we don't do that, right? Hello? Oh, good. Just checking to make sure you're there and awake. So now as the painting is progressing, only now do I go in and start putting in some details on things like the slicker and the ropes and the conchos on his shaps, things like that. And also I start adding in some of the reflected light in the shadows, just a little bit. You want those shadows to be nice and dark, but you've got to put a little bit of detail in and color in on the horse's tail and his mane, that kind of thing. Now in this particular painting, as compared to the smaller one that I did, there's a lot more color that's going on in the shaps and everywhere else, because you have a larger space that has to be filled up and keep the eye interested. Now we'll talk a little bit about glazing. Glazing is a wonderful way of adding some color back in without having to repaint the whole thing. So I felt like on this cowboy shirt, I wanted the color to be a little more intense. And just by glazing, by adding some transparent oil paint, a very little bit, into your painting medium, you can get that color and make it nice and saturated and pop. It's one of the things that I do when I get down towards the end of the painting and I feel like it needs a little bit of orchestration. So I add in these small details. I simplify where things need to be simplified. And I go back in and I do things like this where I put highlights on the clouds. It's not something that has to happen, but it's much more pleasing to your eye to see that those clouds actually turn a little bit. So as they turn towards that moonlight, they're going to catch a little more light, but they're so translucent that it doesn't catch a lot of the light. They should never be bright or anywhere near as bright as the stars that are in the sky. But if you add a little bit of that in, you're going to find that it's pretty pleasing. It's those little details that really help to make a painting be successful and take you from being just starting out or an advanced amateur into a professional. You kind of will learn what you need to in order to make that painting finish and be able to put your name on it. On this particular frame, I decided that I needed to add a little bit of that blue color, dusty blue, to make the frame work better with what was going on in the painting. So I just thinned down my oil paint a little bit. I put it in the cracks and the crevices, and I will wipe it off with a paper towel. Sometimes I'll go over it with a little bit of a soft brush, like I am here. And I do that all the way around. And when you're done, boy, the painting and the frame really work well together. That's something that I'm looking to do. Is I'm going to be doing a video in the future telling you how I frame. I'm going to talk with my framer and get tips and techniques on successfully framing your work. I'm also going to tell you a little bit about some of my tricks in order to make the frame and the painting work really well together. So stay tuned for that. Hey, thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Here's that spiel that comes at the end of every video. If you like what you see, if you like this kind of content, hey, subscribe. What do you got to lose? And hit the notification bell so that you know when I upload new content. Don't be shy about hitting the like button. It really helps the channel out. And hey, I'll see you down the road.